Welcome to the podcast that discusses storytelling from all angles to help you and us answer the call when the muse screams, "Tell the damn story." We'll be exploring the challenges of being creative in fiction, illustration, comics, film, and nonfiction. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Tell the Damn Story. Today, once again, it's me and Alex, while Tim Fielder is out and about causing havoc and spreading the religion of Matty Rocket.
Yes, so, out in Colorado this time.
Out in Colorado.
That's
the
right.
Rocky Mountain High has never been higher than
Since
since Matty Rocket has shown up.
Yeah.
All right, so today we're going to take advantage of having two writers in the house and talk about character and the idea of, well, how do you put character in character? So, Alex, talk to me.
I'll be happy to talk to you.
How do we go from an idea, right? I want to do a story about, a young prince comes home, his dad is dead, and his mom is remarried. Now that's conflict, but how do we get a person out of that, right? How do we inject character into our characters?
Well, I always say to my students that the first thing to help you. I love the cup, by the way. Let's get a close up of the cup. There's a character for you. Okay, so I always say to my students, and it's my philosophy, and I would say the philosophy of a lot of writers that I admire. Plot's cool. Special effects, tricks, great settings, all that stuff is necessary and wonderful and everything. But if the character has no substance to it, then it's pointless. And to me, a lot of what drives the story is the character, who they are, what are their goals as they move through the story. So for me, I always try and develop as much as I can, as much knowledge in my head. And of course, I'm making this up, but I'm pulling it from references. I try and figure out who this character is. So in this case with the prince, how old is he? Okay, he's coming home. Coming home to where? Where is home? What culture is that in? Where has he been? What was it like?
Elsinore would be a different story than, say, the Hamptons, Long Island. Whole different story.
Well,
right?
even Zorro. I mean, if you want to talk, you're talking to Zorro. Don Diego's coming home back from Spain, back to his home in California, to encounter the things that eventually caused him to take on the persona of Zorro. But he's coming. He left as one individual to study in Spain. He spent years there going to school and learning, science and literature and all this stuff, and fencing and everything, because he has to be, a gentleman. He has to be a proper gentleman to come back and fit into the status of his family. But he didn't realize that when he came back, he would be coming back to use all this new knowledge to liberate his people in the city from the oppression of the military at that time. So, once again, you go back to that query of yours about the prince. Who was he when he left? How old was he when he's coming back? Who is he? What has happened to him in that time? And then when you get there, and other things that you would look at is, what was his original relationship with his mother? What was his relationship with his father? Those are the things that you start to figure, because that's going to impact on how he feels about a stepfather before he even meets the guy.
Right.
And then you get into developing who are these other supporting characters that he is now going to bounce off of. Is this father a jerk, or is he really a nice guy, but the son just can't see it because you're not my dad? There's all kinds of ways to play that.
Sure. Now, you did mention before that pre-writing, right? You think about the characters and all that sort of stuff. And I wanted to talk about a practical guideline that new writers might want to go to find a way into that process, right? Well, you've seen them, I've seen them, we've all seen character profiles. And I do a blog, as you know, Chris Ryan writes on WordPress, and I've been doing a series of blogs now called the Let It Suck series. The idea is to get your story out, let it suck, and then in rewrites we'll get to polish and all that. And one of the things I did was it was a Let It Suck series revisiting Write Better with character profiles. And I provided a character profile with 110 profile elements. And it was an exercise in what you're talking about. The more you know about your character, the more, it's a mug battle. The more you know about your character, the more you know your story. Character is plot, plot is character. So, I mean, it starts with very generic things: name, age, gender, left-handed, right-handed. And people might think, well, what's that matter? If you're left-handed or you're right-handed, your life is completely different. Hair details, all that stuff, height, weight, measurements, build. But then we go into a little more detail, such as preferred style of dress, style of work clothes, style of non-work clothes, occupation, yearly salary, benefits, work schedule, and hours, right? If you work in the night shift, it's a different story than if you work in the day shift. Career history, what did the character want to be as a child? What did the character want to be as a college student? How did the character get from those aspirations to where she or he is now? Dream job, nightmare job, plans for retirement, full current address, birthplace, where did she or he grow up, what was the place like, with whom did he or she grow up, best childhood memory, worst childhood memory. It goes on and on.
You're building this character, from the ground up.
Exactly, and the reason I'm offering this is that if we have someone who's watching now and says, yeah, it's good to say, think about your character, but what do I think? What do I know? This is kind of a pretty good
Template.
tool to get, the more of these questions you can answer, the better. If you can answer all of them about your character, I think you're ready to write as long a story as need be. The idea is, it's all in the details, isn't it?
Right? Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
And
again, what you're talking about is building the profile of that lead character, but that applies actually to all of your supporting characters.
In the blog, I suggest to do it for as many characters as possible.
Yeah, exactly.
The more you know about them, it becomes very dynamic if you have a detailed profile on, say, the male lead, the female lead, the secondary, 3 characters. Now you go to Neil Simon, great Broadway play writer, and he'd say, you want me to write a play, just let me put a couple characters in a room, and what I know about them will do the rest. And it's exactly that kind of thing, that visualization in detail, and the stuff that goes back to the childhood that informs the decision making, the way he or she presents herself or himself in public as an adult. Style of clothing means a lot. I grew up. I was 4 out of 5 children, single income family in the Bronx. A lot of hand-me-downs. We'd get hand-me-downs from, definitely from I had one brother who was not quite 2 years older than me. And there are Christmas pictures where one Christmas he's wearing a shirt, and the next Christmas I'm wearing that same shirt. That informs a character more than, say, someone who throws all his clothes out every season because he couldn't be seen,
in the same clothes twice. Yeah.
Oh no, couldn't do that. Those were last seasons. I still don't know seasons.
Well, you're talking about that scenario. I had no siblings on either end of the stick, and so I was, being the only child.
So you had to hand down your stuff to yourself.
Yeah, well, pretty much it's like behind my back. But the other thing was, because I was raised on public assistance, which was not the term they used at the time. we only got an allowance for clothing once a year.
Right.
And it was pathetic. It was pittance. So, you might be able to look forward to a pair of jeans and a pair of slacks
Yeah.
and a couple of decent shirts. And then, of course, if you're, I had very few relatives, but, my grandmother and grandfather would come up with something, around the holidays. But for the most part, I had a very small selection of clothing that had to last me for quite some time. So if I did any damage to them, that was a problem.
Yeah. Yeah.
On the one hand, as I got older and I started making my own income, you want to have more clothes. And on the other hand, you're kind of used to
Oh yeah.
not having, yeah,
It's very
making,
difficult to go shopping, which
yeah.
informs the character and informs your story.
Hmm.
Um, there was a time. This again is another anecdote. It'll be the last anecdote I use for clothing, but um, my mom got this whole big bag of dress pants for school. Right, I went to a parochial high school. Um, they were, I won't even describe the pants, but anyway, they were distinctive. They were, all right, you know what? Plaid double knit bell bottoms.
There
Okay, there
you
you go.
go. I knew
There
it.
you
I
go.
knew
All right,
it. I
all
knew
right.
it. Okay,
70s, the
let's give the
1970s.
audience a
Right?
picture here,
So
right?
now here's the twist, and you can see how this would inform.
You don't have any photos, do you?
No, yes, I do, but not tonight.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh, okay, okay.
so I wear these one. Well, there's a couple of pairs of pants, but I wear one pair of pants to school, like the next week or whatever. And I didn't know where they came from. You know, she says a friend, down the block, his kids are outgrowing him or whatever. And I was like, wow, that's kind of crazy, but the money was tight. What are you gonna do? So this guy walking down the hallway of my high school while we were changing classes pointed at my pants and said, "Wow, those are my pants."
Oh, 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 oh,
Ah,
oh. Out loud in front of?
yeah. And I
Oh.
knew that my full choice of pants were all that experience, and I could not get the parentals to understand. So you can, I mean, to this day, if I'm going somewhere, clothes are still an issue. I'm not, I mean, we're paying the bills, everything's doing well. Um, but I'll change a shirt or a pair of pants 3 or 4 times, and it's all echoes of that thing. So that's what we mean by the more you know about the character, the more it'll resonate as real, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Um, someone who uh, is driven to school every day goes through a different experience than someone who, takes the bus to school or walks to school. These are all
Or
different
runs if
experiences.
they have to through a certain
Having
neighborhood.
a pet, not having a pet, having a lot of siblings, having no siblings, all of these things. This is where we this is the material we use to put character in character.
And
And you
and and
can't.
also, go
Please
ahead.
go ahead.
I was going to say, so also the reality of relationships, the value and the levels of relationship in your life as you're growing up. Characters like again to refer to maybe an iconic character like we'll say a Bruce Wayne. The idea of the Batman, whether you're dealing with the 1930s or 40s version or the 1990s or the 2000s, is his parents were killed, and so this guy is that his whole life changed at the death of his parents, and how he saw the world from that point forward helped affect what he became and what he
Yeah.
was driven to become. And so, whether you're dealing with a guy who said, "I'm going to help people so that that doesn't happen to anybody else again," or you're dealing with this brooding, intense character, whichever way you want to portray Batman, that's his demon. His demon, or the thing that still lives with him, is the pain and the loss of his parents. So, how he grew up, whether Alfred was there and showed him, support, or some relative, or he grew up in a boarding house, a boarding school rather, all of those things factor into what kind of human being he comes back as. And
True.
when people are doing, when people are creating the characters, some folks will stop at a type. I don't want to say stereotype. I'll just say a type.
Hmm.
They'll envision this individual, their characteristics sort of like, oh, I saw a guy like that or a gal like that. Okay, that's what I'll do, and they'll stop right there. And that's part of what makes it two-dimensional, because you're basically doing a photocopy of
Right.
something you've seen. But it's 2D. You turn it sideways, there's nothing there. And so
Well,
it starts to mimic lines that other people have written rather than you coming from the experience this character has lived and subsequently allowing your material to be more original.
and I want to get back to that, but I don't want to let Bruce go without making one other point. The Bruce Batman character, um, I think, is a good example for people to look at if they want to see more successful, less successful interpretations of character.
Mm.
Um, in the 40s, like
Mm-hmm.
38 to the 40s when he first was starting, um, relatively dark, but I guess you would call it now kind of a shorthand. They didn't really get that deep into it, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, they would have maybe a page or a panel reminding people of his origin and then going to it, right? And
Right.
then the 50s came after
The
the
Atomic Age?
no, after the something of the innocent, what was the
Oh,
report?
yes, yes.
Seduction of the Innocent, and
Right.
Batman became this very square character, very jovial, and they'd fight, generic space monsters or this or that, and not have any problems whatsoever. No reference at all to the childhood and to the pathos of Batman or Robin. And then comes the rebirth, Neil Adams and Denny O'Neil. They make him the Dark Knight detective again.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, it is dark. And there are elements of Sherlock Holmes, there's elements of his detectiveness, but we also start getting uh, reference to his the things that happened in his past that made him who he was. And we start seeing the psychology of Batman versus uh, Two-Face or versus Scarecrow or versus
Joker.
Joker, of course. And they were great, perfect foils for one another because they were, characterization-wise, they were opposites, but each marked by tragedy. And it became this great psychological opera about how you deal with the challenges put forth to you in your life. And the best Batman stories from that point on have explored that. Whether it was, you know, um, Jeff Loeb and Tim Sale doing you know, the retelling the origin of Robin in Dark Victory, or whether it was The Killing Joke, where actually they were exploring the origin of Joker and all the things that happened to him that informed him, that convinced him the world didn't make sense. All of that comes out of the backgrounds of the characters. And that's where, again, you get the richest stories. The best stories of, like, say, Spider-Man relate to his guilt from what happened between him and Uncle
With
Ben,
Uncle Ben,
or
right.
his worry about Aunt May, or
Let
his
me let me
concern,
let me segue, because part of what we were going to cover is the why it matters, and I think we touched on it a little bit, but to underscore it, I often say to my students, and I think it's real for so many people, the movies that you go see, the TV shows that you watch, or the books that you read, where you go, oh boy, that was lame, or I don't believe that character, I don't believe that person would do such a thing. Say, I can't believe what he said or did. A lot of those are those moments when the writer spoke, but the character didn't, or there are moments when little or no effort was put into it. Someone was saying that they love special effects movies. They think those are the best movies. And I don't take anything from anybody who does them or who likes them. I said, but I'll also bet that the majority of special effects movies are not the ones that the people remember the most, that they enjoyed the most. because you know, every time I hear people going crazy about a film, maybe it's an action film or it's a love story, they're talking about, oh, I can't believe what so and so said or so and so did. And did you see when he did that, or did you see how she said or what she said to him? You know, it was those things where the character grabbed you and convinced you to go on this ride, on this journey through this story. You know, whether it's and I use as a reference, you know, in the film classes I do, I use The Apartment with Jack Lemmon and Shirley MacLaine's, made in the '60s, in black and white film. You know, nothing gets blown up, nobody gets shot in that. And in effect, it's a fully character-driven story. Great humor, it's got a plot there, all of that.
Dialogue.
Yeah, amazing. But it's all around these people and how they interact. And that film would have died if we didn't care about those characters. We didn't become involved and sympathize and identify with those characters. So I think, you know, for me, for sure, writing about rich characters, letting those characters really take hold of the story, makes the writing more interesting for me as one. And it also makes telling the story easier, because often as writers, if we half-step, okay, we don't do that homework, well, we're pushing plot. And sometimes a plot hits a snag, and we're not sure where to go with it, and we're not sure how we got stuck in that spot, and we're desperately trying to figure out some wonderful gimmick or something to get us out of it. And 9 times out of 10, for me, what would the character do?
Right. Well, that's the key, you know, and not to rhyme with it, but Robert McKee says the best thing to do with your character is paint them into a corner. And then you go to the background of the character, how that character is going to react under pressure. That reveals, and that's the moment that people are looking for. To go back with Jack Lemmon in The Apartment, the reason why that story works is because we see ourselves, a lot of us see ourselves in Jack Lemmon.
Yeah,
you know,
so Schleb, he's got a regular kind of job.
He is taken advantage of. He has the pressures of doing stuff he's not comfortable with because he has to keep his job, and
he actually even wants to move up in his job. Right. And he's not sure it's going to happen because he's one of hundreds of people on this one floor.
Right.
And that's part of how the people take advantage of him, is they say, hey, we can help you with that.
It's universal, right? And how do you get to that universal? The specifics always get you to the universal. That you know this about that character is how we're allowed in, you know? One of the great problems with Superman is that he is not exactly relatable. Clark Kent is more relatable, but
you can't fly.
Can't fly. You know, it's an interesting inversion because Bruce Wayne. None of us are going to be Bruce Wayne. We'd like to be Bruce Wayne, you know, but all of us want that to be that avenging angel of darkness, you know. But Superman will never be Superman because we know where we were born. But then you see the shucksness and the, you know, in the best Superman stories, they take great pains to show him stumble or show him flub a chance to, you know, impress Lois to get that humanity. It all comes from shared, you know, the Carl Jung, you know, the collective unconscious, right? That shared experience. When we see someone on the screen or in the novel or in the comic book, or for you and me, you know, pulp fans, you know, the old radio shows, when we catch on to somebody that has a similar experience to us, you know, has failed, is trying, is essentially a good person, that's our doorway in. You know?
I got to say, you know, talking about Superman, and then we need to move on to the other thing we wanted to cover too, and this is how, and you've already touched on some of that as well. But in talking about Superman, my favorite Superman of the current era, all right, so we're going to say somewhere between, you know, in the 2000s, let's just put it that way, is What's Wrong with Truth, Justice, and the American Way, or What's the Matter with It, and it was written by Joe Kelly. And in it, Superman goes up against a team of quote-unquote heroes or more anti-heroes who are extremely, you know, great deal of power. And what they're doing is they're taking out the deadly threats. They're taking out these huge giant monsters and whatever, but they're killing them. They're basically saying, "Now your problem, you're gone." Bam, and they're destroying them. And people are starting to cheer them on because they're saying, Superman, he captures this person, this alien, and they lock them up and they break loose, and there they are, terrorizing and killing people again. This is what we need. These guys, that's what we need. And Superman winds up having to go up against them because he keeps trying to tell them, you can't do this. You can't just arbitrarily take life. And they're saying, oh, yeah, we can. Not a problem. Well, as a matter of fact, they're cheering us doing it, so get out of the way. And he won't. He keeps trying to convince them that this is not what you do until they reach a point where they're saying, okay, now you're the problem, and we got to deal with you. And it's what happens in that confrontation and the revelations from that confrontation that make that, for me, one of the strongest Superman stories that they've ever done. And it resonates magnificently with me, right out there with some of the lines and some of the films and things that I've seen recently, and I've talked about, like Captain America, Winter Soldier. There's some great stuff in that where it resonates in the same way. So I think, again, your story is more memorable when your characters are more memorable, when they have done things, when you, you've taken them through the muck and the mire and through hell and high water, and they persevere somehow. They get beaten down, and they manage to stand back up and come at it. And that makes for
I'm with you to the end of the line, right?
Yeah.
I'm with you to the end of the line. That was a great line from that movie. So we've been talking about iconic characters, and we've been talking about getting the characterization in the character. And you wanted to talk a little bit about how. Now, I've talked about my character profile, and I think that helps a lot. What else can you offer people?
Well, again, for some people who, and I think, a list like you just presented would be great if it's accessible to people. But, aside from list.
On the blog.
There you go. So you hear that, folks? Boom, boom. We should put a link to that. But the other thing is, for some people, especially for some of the younger writers, who may or may not focus on the list initially, you build characters in your imagination based on your experiences and the experiences of others. So, sometimes a jumping off point is people that characteristics that your family or your friends have that fit with the character you're trying to create. That's one of the things that I find, most useful, because sometimes, I think about this character I'm creating and go, wow, it's a lot like so-and-so. Yeah, let me try that, or sometimes something you see on the street, a person, the way they're acting, handling themselves, what they're going through at that time, or what they're wearing, what they're doing. These are things that register with us, and we can utilize in building up our character. It becomes part of the source material. I say to a lot of people that I work with, and some of my students, I say, we are in effect a Sherlock Holmes. We see and we observe. So we take note of these things. These are facts and figures and elements and clues and things that work really well to help us build that character. So maybe you're going to answer questions on a list like Chris has provided, which is great. And that may give you everything you need. Or maybe sometimes you need to pull from your own experience, your feelings, or, as I said, from the sources of the people around you, people that you've seen or know. That's another way to go.
All right, like the great saying, every artist is a thief, right? We look around, I just finished Genius High, and the protagonist,
which is your book,
is my YA.
Thank you. Because they don't know what that is, you can't tell them yet.
And the hero of the book is an African American kid who looks way older than his age. He just kind of has a little kind of a settled body of maybe a 40-year-old who works in a stationery store, as opposed to a 17, 18-year-old. That is extrapolated from a student I met this year. I didn't anticipate that he would be the hero. I knew what I wanted a character to do, and I was casting in my head, as you say, who would this be? And I've gone away from casting actors, and I've just looked at
people I've seen, and he appeared and merged with the characterization I knew, and boom, there it is. So, that's what you do. We have the profile. It's Chris Ryan Writes at WordPress. Look through the Let It Suck series, and it's about character profile.
There you go.
You have every writer out there, every artist out there. You have your eyes and your ears and your nose, and smell it and see it and listen, and that's all the palette that you paint from, and you use all of that, and you use all your imagination and all the thinking you've done about your characters to tell the damn story.
If you want to hear more about the show or any of us, go to tellthedamnstory.com.